I'm really excited to introduce our next and our final guest of this series, James Atherton, longtime permaqueer friend, heavily involved in Realliance, Regenerosity, historically with Blush, but instead of putting words in your mouth, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Toad, Guy, Sticks, the wonderful permaqueer folk, the wonderful audience. So wonderful to be here with you all. Great to see you. Uh, as Toad mentioned, my name's James. I use he or they pronouns. I'm calling in from a place where two rivers meet, surrounded by chalk hills, also known as Oxford in the UK, which is a really interesting place if you haven't been. I I find it very, very powerful, very rich nature and biodiversity, but also a place of very strange power and power dynamics. A lot of British politicians and power holders were kind of trained in this place. So there's a lot of strange power dynamics, which I kind of have the maybe not pleasure, but I get to see. But it's a very beautiful place as well. Like I mentioned, where two rivers meet.
And
I work with a wonderful network called Realliance, and also another called Regenerosity. Realliance is a network of permaculture and regenerative practitioners from around the world, but specifically working where there is humanitarian need or post-disaster. So it's many people working in those contexts like displacement or after environmental disasters, working to heal both the land, but also community and fair exchanges. And Regenerosity is another organization focused on creating healthy flows of capital, whether it's financial capital or other capital, in service of permaculture and regeneration. So a lot of that is working with wealth holders and funders to try and nurture a spirit of generosity toward the regenerative movements, including permaculture. I wonder, Toad, Guy, Sticks, if there are still people arriving, should we start with a breath?
Yeah, absolutely. We've a lot of the participants are also unable to attend because of time zones. So feel free to go ahead and we'll proceed as needed. Yeah.
Great. And I know it's been a long day for some folk who have been part of this wonderful series. So blessings to those who it's been a very long day and you're ready for a nice nap. And for some people, I know it's the start of the day. For me, it's the start of the day. So maybe we can just take a moment to arrive here together with some breaths. So however you want to do this, whether it's with your eyes closed, feeling yourself firmly against whatever surface you're on. Maybe that's a chair, maybe that's the ground, maybe it's your feet, maybe it's your bum or another part of your body. Feeling a surface beneath you and being conscious of being held. And together, let's take a few deep breaths together. Deeply in, deeply out. Deeply in, deeply out. And allowing yourself to continue the cycle of deep breath as you arrive here, however you need to be, ready and present. And for me, that means a sip of coffee. Thank you so much, everyone. Such a pleasure to share space with you all. Some of you may have seen that the wonderful Luby McNamara was also supposed to join this session, but Luby passes on her apologies because she has a family emergency. So we send love to Luby. But in a moment, I'd love to introduce something from Luby. But something I'd really love to talk about today is about how we can bring about change in our communities, especially through process, through good process. Now, of course, permaculture design is very much centered on process, which puts us as humans, as those with capacity to change the world around us. And permaculture design processes can actually help us collectively imagine a world that has very viable alternatives for healthy cultures, for both people and planet. And just to bring in the wonderful work of Luby McNamara, who has a new book coming out. It may be out in your country or place wherever you are in the world. It is out in the UK where I am. So Luby McNamara's new book is all about this, actually. So it's such a, maybe not a coincidence, but I wanted to talk about design processes. But I just want to read just a couple of sentences from Luby because they really capture something that I think is important. And she asks, so this book is called Design Adventures, and she's talking about why the word adventure. And I think this is really lovely. When collaborating with people, Luby says, anything can happen. The idea of adventure is subverting notions of design being formulaic, precise, or having all the answers. Design is a weaving with the mystery of life and our own skills, passions, and motivations. It is an opportunity to create our own stories. I think that's really potent because we'll be talking, I'd love to introduce some design processes that we've been working with our community at Realliance. And I think when we're talking about process formulas, just as Luby says, we never want it to be rigid. These are always thinking about the emergence that comes from bringing together a group of people and the wisdom that comes from that. So if you're interested in a book about design processes, a little plug on behalf of Luby, it really deepens into her design web, which you may be familiar with, books like People of Permaculture. So lots of love for Luby. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. I need to share sound because it's not letting me share sound. So I'm going to deal with that, cross that bridge when we come to it. You will just have to remind me when you can't hear something later on. Okay. I hope you can see this. Please tell me if you can't.
We can see it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And a huge shout out to one of our Realliance members, which is called Minak Projects. This is Sandrine, who is a mushroom trainer, so growing mushrooms in reusable pots in Naki Valley refugee settlement. And if you want to see a really gorgeous, inspiring video, feel free to scan this QR code. And I thought this picture is so lovely because I know the theme of this Permaculture is Political series has been really centered around mushrooms. I see mushrooms in the branding, so how gorgeous is this? But I really wanted to talk about process, as I mentioned. And I think sometimes processes, permaculture design processes, really encourage us to map what's already there, to map kind of existing resources. And I think when we're talking about social change and cultural transformation and political shifts, mapping resources can be a really important step and it can be very meaningful because it can show us that a lot of what we're trying to create may already exist. So it can really show us that there are viable alternatives, viable post-capitalist and post-imperialist alternatives already existing and sometimes thriving in pockets of action within communities. And I'd love to share a couple of examples of this from the Realigns network. And one of those is from the wonderful Yise Uganda, co-founded by Noah and Winnie, working in Uganda. And they are an amazing group of people who, one of their pieces of work is creating demonstration gardens of permaculture design. So this is one of their food forests in Nakivale refugee settlement. And as they were creating these permaculture spaces, these wonderful demonstration gardens to show people what's possible, to help people vision and imagine what's possible, they noticed something really interesting, because when the farmers and the families who had created these beautiful gardens, they were creating a lot of surplus food and surplus vegetables. So they were meeting their needs, their own needs, and they were kind of encouraging them to be like, why don't you make a bit of extra income and sell this surplus in a local market? Why don't you kind of sell your vegetables so you can make some income for other needs that you may have beyond food? And they noticed something really interesting and wonderful happening that kind of surprised them. And then they told me, I absolutely love this story as well. Because many farmers, some sold their surplus vegetables at the market, of course, but many farmers were actually doing something different. Many of these farmers were entering into these kind of solidarity economies of sharing and trade and mutual aid, where they were giving away their surplus vegetables for free to others in the refugee settlement who needed it. And they were sometimes trading, or they were creating free stalls where vegetables could be given away. And I thought this was so beautiful, because this really challenges the conventional economic systems as a whole, but also the conventional humanitarian systems, which really encourage people to sell and enter into these kind of market economies and create a kind of conventional economy within refugee settlements. But they didn't. These farmers were so inspired by all the surplus that they were creating, and felt so much solidarity with one another that they created these wonderful moneyless solidarity economies, which were really rich and potent. And this happened because of the processes that Winnie and Noah from Yise Uganda and their wonderful team were going through with community. They noticed that through the design process itself and through setting up these permaculture gardens, the community were creating these wonderful, strong bonds, connecting with each other, and were able to map each other's needs. So I thought this example was really rich and really potent, because it talks about how through the process itself, it created a lot of richness and resilience in the community that was undertaking and going through this process collaboratively. So I thought this was a beautiful example, and also just a beautiful photo from Yise Uganda. Look at that abundant food forest. So gorgeous. Another thing that we've been working on with our community at Realigns is looking at the role of storytelling in cultural transformation and cultural shift. And we have been going through this process over about 2 years now with our community at Realigns. We're a community of about 200 permaculture organizations across the world, all over, but with a heavy kind of representation from East Africa. So our example from Yise Uganda, Uganda in East Africa as well. But also members all over the world. So this is a shout out as well. If you ever want to join Realign Spaces, you're absolutely welcome. All are welcome. And we were exploring this idea of how storytelling can help bring about change in the communities where our partners are working, to really bring people around this idea of permaculture and regeneration, and help really create the conditions for regeneration to thrive. Because something that we've been noticing is that often when we introduce permaculture and regeneration to folk, there needs to be, I wonder if you will agree with this, but there needs to be a level of kind of inner capacity, maybe, to understand some of the concepts of regeneration deeply. Maybe I can ask you all later if you resonate with that. But anyway, we thought storytelling could be one way of helping to create this kind of shift and this and build and grow the inner capacities of folk, because stories can really resonate with our own lived experience as the listener or the audience of the story. And it also goes beyond just simple facts. So a lot of what we were noticing that was our partners at Realliance, and also ourselves as the Realliance kind of facilitation team, is that we found it quite hard to do communications and storytelling, because we were so busy with work that it was hard to actually stop and think about what happened and think about our stories and think about how that could support other people in their learning as well. So we were often doing communications that sounded quite factual, and of course stories should, be factual too, but you know what I mean? They sounded like reports. They sounded like a very dry report. So, but stories are a little bit different, I feel. Stories go beyond just simple communicating of facts, and they kind of help to really reach something deeper and maybe sometimes more emotive. And they often help to challenge something a bit deeper and shift belief and transform belief. I also think stories can often be a lot more accessible. Not everyone can sit and listen to dry facts for, an hour. You're probably going to be bored of my voice already. So imagine reading a really long report that I've written. You'd just be ready for a good snooze. But stories help people to explore ideas in ways that are maybe a bit more accessible, because it brings in feeling, it brings in connection, and makes it easier to understand. And so stories really help spur action. So we were thinking, how do we design stories that can really help grow inner capacities in the communities who are hearing them? So with our community, I mentioned we went through this process for a couple of years. We co-developed a design process for creating stories. And I won't go super deeply into this, but I will say as an offering that we can host a workshop about this design process another time. If it's interesting to anyone, I can put my contact details in the chat afterwards if you want to reach out. But this was a design process that we co-created with our community to give voice to our stories. So yes, the acronym is VOICES. We did a little pun there. Hope you like it. And VOICES is all about giving voice to your story, giving voice to your community, and listening to the voices of those affected. Starting, of course, with visioning with community, going through a process of really dreaming what's possible with your story. And then those of you who are permaculture designers will know a usual kind of surveying stage of observing and surveying what's already there and what resources you have available to you. Through a process of integration and creating, evaluating and evolving your story. And then, of course, the very important share. And we've noticed that this can also be used as a permaculture design process for other designs beyond storytelling creation. And sharing is quite an important one, because we noticed that, like I mentioned, so many permaculture design folk, so many permaculture designers often don't have capacity for sharing their work. Often they find that they're so deep in the work that sharing can be something challenging. So this is just a kind of a reminder and a provocation that sharing is so rich and important. So that's where that's there. That's the VOICES design process. And I want to share in a moment one of our wonderful members at Realliance created a story based on this design process. So I'd like to at least share an introduction to that in a moment. Something else we really dove into as a community was this idea of stories, not only sharing stories of regeneration and permaculture, but stories themselves being regenerative. So what could it look like for a story to actually be transformative in itself? And this is something that we dreamt of as community, that the stories themselves should, of course, always be rooted in regenerative. And just to say, just a little side note, a little timeout moment, that the language we use is often focused on regeneration. But I know many of you will be permaculture practitioners and folk, and we just want to say that when we use the term regeneration, we use that to be an inclusive term, which includes movements like permaculture, like agroecology, agroforestry, and of course, many indigenous knowings. So we aim to use this term regenerative to be inclusive. So sorry, I just thought I'd mention that. So stories that are regenerative as well as sharing about regeneration. We always imagine them to be rooted in regenerative paradigms, so regenerative ways of thinking, regenerative ways of being, and of course, principles, living systems principles that we learn from the living world, and regenerative practice, regenerative paradigms, principles, and practice, always rooted in that. And why is that so important? Because I feel like we could design stories that are using this framework, but are maybe focused in a degenerative mindset or a destructive mindset. So this is kind of to say that the stories themselves should always be rooted in the ideas of, in permaculture, we have the three core ethics of people care, earth care, and fair share. So always rooting the stories, and the stories kind of emerge from that. And then this kind of ripple out effect that we hope regenerative stories to have is that, finding the uniqueness of the story so that it is relevant to your work and your community, but also relevant to others. So finding the real essence of the story. And then as the story begins to grow and ripple out, we want to make it accessible, about finding key messages that you want people to take away, making it clear, making it understandable. And then as the story begins to grow as well, making sure that we're bringing in ways that people can learn from the stories. What can people take away? What could be that transformational element that you want the story to have? So how do you embed learning in the story? How do you use storytelling as a medium to support people in their learning? That's a little introduction to our regenerative storytelling practice. And we kind of mapped that onto a little flow chart on the side here. You can see just kind of a very brief introduction of how to go through this process and create a story, and kind of rooting in some regenerative principles here, which I won't dive too deeply into. Because I'd love to give a voice. Well, this is the time when I need audio, so let's see if this works. Please tell me if it doesn't. I want to give voice to another wonderful Realliance member called Gabriela, who is the co-founder of an organization in Sierra Leone called SILC, Society for Indigenous Languages, Cultures, and Communities. And Gabriela went through this process with his community of designing a story and created something so beautiful. And he's just going to introduce it. Then I'm going to share the link so you can watch the story yourself. So tell me if you can hear this. If not, we're going to just have a little tech moment. Let's see.
We can't hear. You might need to, in your little share, when you hit the share button, it comes up with like share from your laptop sound. So when you hit that button to share, it brings up the little square. And in the share options in the bottom right, it'll say share sound. Click on that.
think I got it. Thank you so much for being my tech guide. Tell me if this works. Here's Gabriela.
Kamara from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I am the founder for the Society for Indigenous Languages, Communities and Cultures in Sierra Leone. We are working to revitalize the endangered languages and endangered cultures in Sierra Leone. We connect language, culture, and the sacred forest. The sacred forest is where we have the cemetery, where our ancestors are buried. And these forests were highly prohibited from timber logging or whatsoever to do. It is a ceremonial forest that was preserved for spiritual beliefs. But today, the forest has been humiliated due to deforestation of money-making, charcoal burning, timber logging for exportation. And the ceremonies in the sacred forest has been abandoned due to religion and some kind of social activities today. I'm sharing a story of the sacred forest and our culture. And we connect language. Language cannot be separated from the culture. And culture cannot be separated from our land. Our land, where our ancestors are buried, our ancestors were monolingual. They don't speak other language. They speak only the language of the land. Bearing this in mind, the Society for Indigenous Languages decided to revitalize the practice in the forest because the forest is a place where no one is allowed to speak another language. It's only the language in the ground. So today, the degraded sacred forest, we are giving those lands to landless women to plant cassava and other tree crops. This is our traditional way of conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Gabriela for sharing that by voice note. And so as Gabriela was talking about the amazing connection that his culture has to the sacred forests, and through the process of storytelling as went through a process of finding out more about this kind of nature-inspired language, and he wants to share that with you. I won't share the video here, but here's a QR code, and I'm going to give you a moment to scan it because I would love to show Gabriela how many views that people want to hear this gorgeous story. It's wonderful. I think it's about between 5 to 10 minutes. Please feel free to listen and watch. Gabriela is an amazing storyteller, so please listen. So this process of creating stories can be really rich and can really help us shape and change belief over time in our communities. And I think that's really important because permaculture design often, as designers, when we forget about sharing the stories, this can be a real moment of social and cultural change. So a reminder for us to really big up the work that we're doing, share it with others, make it accessible and wonderful as it is. So this is a bit about the process we've been going through with our Realigned community to create a design process focused on storytelling for social and cultural change. Before we open up for maybe more discussion or questions, I wanted to share a little something else. It's a bit of a tangent, but a couple of years ago, we went through a process at an event in the UK, Permaculture Convergence in the UK, with a group of other queer LGBTQIA plus community within the permaculture community in the UK. And it was a wonderful process. And in the workshop, we kind of shared our visions for what a queer-inspired permaculture future could look like, and it fed into this digital collage here. So, yeah, this piece was collaborated on together, which was wonderful. But I just wanted to mention how I know this kind of question, this broader question of this series of webinars is about, you know, the political nature of permaculture and is permaculture political? And I mean, I just want to add my thoughts of an absolute yes. I mean, I like to describe permaculture as a way of listening to and translating the wisdom from the living planet and how wild nature thrives, and kind of translating that and understanding that to apply to our own work. And of course, permaculture's principles serve as a way of learning from living systems and applying it. And that kind of acknowledges us as humans as having the capacity to create and change the world around us, create really meaningful and real change in the world around us. Of course, as humans, we have historically used that for a lot of destruction as well. This power to create change in the world around us, we have not used very rightfully and well. But permaculture can really guide us to interact with the world around us in a way that creates space and more capacity for life. And especially when we collaborate with each other and collaborate with other life that we share this planet with. And of course, permaculture's ethics offer us a guiding light and show us a way that we may be of service to life. And I think especially in this moment, and I come here with a bit of fear, because maybe you've all seen the news, it's happening all over the world to some extent, but in the UK, we've recently had a real wave of vocalness of the far right. We had a march recently in the capital in London where they say over 100,000 people showed up in support of kind of fascist politics and far right politics. And it's scary. It's scary for all of us, for those of us who are queer, it's scary. For those of us who are migrants, it's scary. For those of us, I'm sure, who are people of color, it feels very scary. For refugees, for so many of us, it's frightening, isn't it? That a lot of these far right folk are being given a platform and given a lot of voice. And I do believe that it's still a vast minority of people. It's just that these people are given a real platform and a real voice. So I really feel that permaculture design processes can be an antidote to the vocalness of the far right and fascist politics. And also beyond this, it can be almost like it can help us imagine a world like we did in this space in the permaculture convergence. It really helped us imagine a world and imagine human cultures that in many ways are quite different from the current dominant culture, but acknowledging that, of course, that there are pockets of this amazing resistance existing, and the permaculture movements are a really showcase this, how there are pockets of amazing action. And of course, there are so many lineages of unbroken indigenous wisdom. There's so many land-based communities who are showcasing this. So many leftist spaces, even in cities and even in urban spaces, that are showcasing real, viable, powerful, potent examples of what the world can look like. And I think through storytelling and through showcasing our work, we can show how this is possible and how this is happening. And I think this can be one way that we really help in this. I don't want to use the word fight. What do we say instead? This struggle against the far right and the vocalness and the platform that they're being given, really showcasing these amazing pockets of wonderful action and how much change it's creating in the communities that are undertaking them together. So to the question of, is permaculture political? I'd say absolutely so. I mean, look at the core ethics of permaculture, even. The idea of caring for the earth, the idea of caring for people, the idea of fair and equitable distribution of resource, fair share. I mean, how is that not political? That is completely against the dominant culture's understanding of how we live our lives together as people. So permaculture is very political, and this is a call to say, let's showcase it more and more, however we can, showcase how permaculture is making so much change in the places where we work, in the places where we live. I wanted to pause to just see for a moment if there are any stories, any examples of stories from maybe folk in the audience, or I don't know, Guy, Toad, Sticks, if you want to share anything about stories that have moved us to change, stories that have impacted us and helped us grow and evolve and change. And, you know, what about it made it memorable, and what about it made us feel or act? Because I think hearing each other's stories of change could be really powerful too. If that sounds like a fun thing to do, I'd love to hear.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I mean, just story, 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 story. What a joy, and it's beautiful to see the permaculture, design methodology and all of its different applications. And I think, it is a process or a methodology to really create a robust, considered, and diverse system. And if that system is how we transmit, information and story and song, I think, spending time refining what that is, and how power is distributed through story, and how knowledge and how understanding and how these transmutations of information, different ways that they can occur. We had Aaron just say Fareed's story about his mother earlier was transformational. It was, we just had a Palestinian speaker talk about his mum, and his, growing up, going through rituals with her, to call on the rain from the rain god. These personal truths of lived experience, I think, are really, really moving. And I think a story for me, obviously we've been submerged in this web series for past, forever, lifetime it seems, in the most beautiful way. And like stories from Tologomai, from the Pacific Climate Warriors, talking about, how the, Pacific Climate Work view each other and views mutual aid, and what that looks like, and understands food and nourishment, which was really beautiful. And then hearing from Rasha, and on day one talking about, through poetry and place, the bitterness of olives that they have to sit in, through a process of removal. That bitterness is all around them, but not within them, and the reflection of that reality for Palestinians at the moment, that it is all around them. And so these really gorgeous stories of sense making a visceral experience, to create shared value. And I think there's a challenge in permaculture of, how do we cross more lines of solidarity, of diversity, of difference. And I think story plays a really important role in that, and in sense making across divides of lived experience. So I'll pass to Toad. Love story, love it, love it, love it.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, and thank you, James. Um, it really made me reflect also on two people's talks today, especially. Firstly to Jessica Hutchings, who really kind of set the scene and talking about her work with Vandana Shiva and just the fuck up about there. But also in today's session with Ethan Gordon talking about relational values and like how so much in the regen ag sector has very utilitarian values. And really, what can safeguard a lot of the movements from co-option is relationality, which is built through storytelling, and how that becomes really the intervention point, which can help bring the coalition of kind of people back into relational values, as opposed to just kind of this, oh, we do this regenerative process orientated thing to get more of this. And of course, there's productivity amongst that, but the element of like having those relational values enshrined through storytelling, through connection, and all of that. And then again, with Maya's talk about societal foraging and how can we like story, how can we bring metaphor and story to how we do the work in the world as well. So yeah, it feels very apt to end a session on story as well, because we've just been given so many stories here today that, yeah, will take a long time to actually integrate. And how story is something we come back to again and again, and then hit us once, but it's often the retelling or the hearing of that same story again and again and again that really codes something into us.
Thanks, James. We also have two questions here. One just asking the name of the person from Sierra Leone from Silk who shared that story.
Yes, good question. Their name is Gibrilla Kamara. Maybe I can type it somewhere as well too. Or shall I just share my screen again and you can see? 1 second. Here, and then you can see that name. If you like, but the name is Gibrilla Kamara. And the organization is the Society for Indigenous Languages, Communities and Cultures in Sierra Leone. Silk.
And then the next comment was, yes, please, to a story workshop. So we'll make sure that we promote that.
Yeah, excellent. Let's do that. And if you want to drop me an email ever, anyone, my email is very simple. It's james@realliance.org. And Realliance, you can see in my name, re-alliance.org. Yeah, so please feel free to reach out and we can make that happen. And just to completely resonate with you both, Guy and Toad, thank you so much for sharing, especially about the kind of really visceral and emotive power of stories to create social bonds and social change. And yeah, Toad, absolutely agreeing with you about how sometimes regen ag, especially in some regenerative movements, even permaculture has sometimes been co-opted, I don't know if you both agree, into a kind of like sometimes I see permaculture being used almost as a like bunkerist kind of design, or kind of this idea of homesteading, which of course isn't always terrible. But when it's, like you say, separated from community, when it's about individual gain over others, this maybe brings up some problematic natures. And so I agree, stories can also connect us and build community and allow us to listen and hear one another. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you touched on a really big narrative that's come up a few times about permaculture and some of these movements, but permaculture especially, is that for a lot of people go into permaculture to tap out in this kind of bunker idea, that to try to be these regenerative dropouts of society and kind of live isolated. And one of the things we've been talking quite a lot about is what does it mean to tap in to food systems instead of trying to create your own regenerative homestead over here? How do you tap into these wider systems? And I guess that's a really big point as well, is how can we use story to change narrative in permaculture from tap out to tap in? And I'm really interested to see how we can use story to do that. From some campaigning backgrounds, like I'm not gonna like we know that shame and blame are really can be tools doing something, but they're not good tools to start behavior. So I'm really interested in the way we can use storytelling to shift narratives in permaculture and regen ag.
I completely agree. And I also think that permaculture design processes can be useful in terms of mapping what's already existing. Those could almost be leverage points in the dominant culture. They could be places where we can intervene that can create great change from minimal effect, like the permaculture principle. So, for example, like what came to mind for me was in many places around the world, we're lucky enough to have public libraries as one. Like, how amazing is that as a space that shares knowledge and shares workshops for free? So maybe those could be spaces of leverage points where we're bringing permaculture and bringing ideas of regenerative cultural transformation to kind of engage in places where these solidarity economies already exist. But I completely agree, Toad, about how we tap in. I love this framing of how we tap in, especially with food systems. How do we make those changes? Thank you.
Absolutely pegging out right now. Oh, wait, sorry, Stix, if you wanted to go, because I've already asked a question.
Oh, that's okay. I don't have a question, but yeah, sorry, I don't have capacity to respond beyond this, but I just wanted to say thank you for your gorgeous offering, and what a lovely way to close up the series. I really enjoyed the pace and all of the gems in there about sharing story and everything else. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stix. It's been such a pleasure to share space with you all. And I know there's so much wisdom probably in people listening, and also, Stix, Toad, Guy also here. So I know there's more space for us to connect and share. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for the work that you do in Realliance and Regenerosity, and for joining us today.
Wait, no, I have one more question. I feel like it's going towards that, and I have more questions. So I have two questions. The first question from the beginning of yesterday that I've been sitting with a lot is around political formation and what needs to be when I think about network systems, right, and how all these nodes are different, but the vessels between them are capable of allowing something to move through it consistently across the whole system. And in this case, we're wanting power to move across all of that. I'm interested in what the political formation of stories needs to look like for power to be redistributed. And you don't have to answer that because I don't know. But if you do have an answer, that's awesome. But any response to what you think needs to be present in stories across the network of stories for power to move?
Really good question. I love, and I absolutely don't have a succinct answer, but in terms of an organizational design methodology that I love and have taken a lot of inspiration from, and we use a lot of Realliance and Regenerosity and other spaces that I've worked. I'm sure you all know sociocracy, which is about, like you're describing, Guy, how do you create little bubbles of autonomy that can also connect and share resource and communication and story. So I think it takes a design that's unique for each context, of course, because with permaculture and regenerative design, it always needs to be context specific. But I think this design of multiple cells, like you've described, Guy, that have links, and in sociocracy, we use the term lead links. Sometimes that's a kind of rotating or elected figure, which can be the link between the cells. Or usually lead link is kind of describing the kind of central cell, but maybe each individual bubble can have that too. But I think this is a really, I know this word was used kind of maybe semi-negatively earlier, Toad, but to move away from utilitarianism, but I think it can be a very efficient way of sharing. Sorry, use the word efficient next to utilitarian, but I want to try and reclaim it as maybe sometimes a positive thing.
Speaking it as universally bad, it was just in the context of someone else's talks about the regen ag sector in a particular way. So totally makes sense.
Okay, I agree. Yeah, and I totally agree. We shouldn't focus only on efficiency, but it can be really useful in groups. I agree. But it can be a really efficient way of sharing information and power and decision making. And I think that's probably needed as a movement to kind of for quick sharing. So how that's actually physically set up, I don't know. Maybe we need to workshop that and design that together. But does that kind of begin to answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's added, layers to what, so a few different lenses and case studies of how, this story structure can contribute to political formation and the power and the redistribution of power. So thank you. My second question is a question that we're asking everyone. Everyone here has heard me say this a bajillion times, but I'm going to say it again. Our first speaker, Jessica Hutchings, is an amazing Te Mahi Mara who are part of Kore, Indigenous Māori food sovereignty icon, really, shared that we have to act as if blank. And it comes from the late Moana Jackson, a really significant thought leader in Te Ao Māori in the Māori world. And really it's we have to act as if insert a set of conditions. And the question for you and your amazing work in Realliance and Regenerosity that, really focuses on moving resources and redistributing power and wealth and access and opportunity into the right spaces, up against the colonial economic structure of capitalism that we exist within. I'm really interested in what the as if regenerative model of giving and redistribution is for you. So how do you act as if, James?
That's so beautiful and potent. What a lovely question and way of framing it. Can I say something so cutesy? I think we need to act as if we love one another. Because if we're coming from a place of love and care, I think that changes the way that we design our social spaces, the way that we design distributive systems. When we act from a place of love and care, then that changes everything. And I think, I do think that permaculture's core ethics, people care, fair share, and earth care, are also coming from a place of love. How do we care for this planet and love this planet that feeds us, that nourishes us, that gave birth to us? How do we care for one another with love? Is that too cutesy? We have to act as if
no,
we
that's
love
fantastic,
each other.
and it actually mirrors some of the other responses that we've had. So thank you, James.
We're all just so lovey-dovey, a lot of us. Thank you.
Let's see, we've just got a question here. Denise says, thank you, James. If there's little time left, I have a couple of questions regarding Realliance's approach and application of humanitarian aid, since so much of aid today is tied to imperialist economies and purposes. And my second question is if you could speak to the ways in which the ethics of Realliance are reflected in its funding and redistribution of resources. Great question, Denise. I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Denise. And to completely agree with you that aid is historically such a system that has been used to perpetuate and also to spread kind of neoliberalist capitalist economies. And this idea of quote unquote development also kind of goes to when development organizations say development, especially organizations, I won't badmouth individual organizations, but it has been to perpetuate this idea of development being what the global north looks like or what the West looks like, which we know is so problematic and actually just doesn't work. And one way that we like to frame or reframe the idea of aid to be more about solidarity is on thinking almost on a spectrum. So maybe you've seen this idea of a regenerative spectrum, one end being degenerative, one end doing harm to the world and living in an extractive way, and on the other end being regenerative, being in solidarity with, being in relationship with, creating more capacity for life and connection and health and healing, and maybe in the middle being sustainability, which is about maybe keeping things as they are, keeping things just ticking over. So we and this didn't come from us, from Realigns. It came from a predecessor to Realigns called Blueprint, who came up with this mirroring this wonderful spectrum, which I think came from the Regenesis group and Bill Reed, but mirroring this to be more like aid on one end, which is degenerative, which really is about giving aid, sure, but it also often is at the expense of the autonomy of community, and often isn't culturally appropriate or culturally relevant to community. And then in the middle, we have security. So creating food security. Yes, it might be stopping people from harm, or immediate harm, or it might be stopping people from immediate malnutrition, but again, isn't coming from a place of community autonomy. It's not culturally relevant. And on the other end being sovereignty. And, we've heard this term food sovereignty, but also in terms of land sovereignty and other forms of complete community. Thinking on the spectrum of how do we try to work more towards this idea of sovereignty. And I think that can look like being in solidarity with communities in the way that programs are designed, because I do feel like we do need these kind of agencies that help distribute resource, because they are very useful. I also work with Oxfam, which is absolutely wonderful and is also working through a process of decolonization, because acknowledging that Oxfam absolutely haven't got everything right in the past and probably still doesn't, but working towards sovereignty and decolonization. So I think we probably do need these agencies from a distributive perspective, but something that Oxfam is doing that I find quite lovely is actually giving a lot more decision-making and power to country offices and places where the community themselves can design the programs and create the programs that are relevant to them. It's not just replicating what the West or the global North looks like. It's creating something locally appropriate and locally led. Of course, still then, there's a whole process of probably unlearning and decolonization that needs to happen for people in country offices too. I think probably a lot of people need to go through decolonizing what our organizations look like because of the legacy of harmful and destructive systems like colonialism. But I think working towards this idea of sovereignty is very powerful. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I'm also conscious of time. But thank you for that really rich and wonderful question.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for the perspective from where you sit within, so many different regenerative systems. It's beautiful to see what Realigns does and how, the resource redistribution enables sovereignty and empowerment in so many different areas. So thank you for being in that role and also being critical of the limitations of that role and advocating for, like you said, that decolonization of these big institutions that, play a functional role and are constantly readdressing how they play that role. And I think that's our ongoing obligation to decolonization. So thank you so much for holding accountability in that space. Thank you so much for modeling what that looks like and sharing it to us as well. And thank you so much for coming and sharing this beautiful time with us this past hour, James. Thank you.